you guys. That was a lot of fun out there in the end. I mean, the emotional roller coaster. That's like an F1 season. A whole F1 season in one race. That was manic.
That was Jenson Button's radio message to his team after he completed the Echo Park Automotive Grand Prix at the Circuit of the Americas in 2023, his first ever NASCAR race, where he became yet another Formula One driver to take part in the top division of stock car racing in the world, after many of his former competitors had taken that step in years previous. Considering that the Daytona 500, the marquee event for NASCAR, is happening the Sunday after this video is posted, on the 16th of February 2025, I thought I'd shed a light on a series that many Formula One fans may scoff at due to misconceptions often unfairly doled out against the very competitive and top-level competition that they would have otherwise ignored. With that, let's get into this video and discuss the many times that the two very distant worlds have collided, and take a look at what happens when F1 meets NASCAR. Formula One started as a world championship in 1950, but the first ever NASCAR race was held a year earlier, and ever since then there has been quite a bit of crossover between the two. During the early decades of the Grand Prix schedules primarily based in Europe, drivers often competed in multiple series every year due to the less congested nature of Formula One calendars at the time, which until the mid-1970s never exceeded more than 15 races per season. This gave opportunities for people like Jackie Ickx, Jim Clark, Graham Hill, and many others to make waves in a variety of different motorsport categories, such as endurance racing in the Le Mans 24 Hours, the IndyCar Series in the Indianapolis 500, and the British Touring Car Championship. There were some guys like Clark who could notch up 2 or 3 titles in various divisions, such as F1, the Tasman Series, and BTCC, all in one season. Very rarely though did drivers go for the completely alien style of stock car racing, as excluding Americans themselves like Mario Andretti and Mark Donohue, during the early years only 12 examples exist of F1's elite hopping over the pond, with prominent names like Jackie Ickx and Pedro Rodriguez attempting to qualify for a NASCAR event, although none of them had any success, often doing just 1 or 2 races in a short span of time. There were sometimes guys from the USA itself, such as the aforementioned Andretti, Donohue and Dan Gurney, who achieved several wins, but it took a long while before those who had made a name for themselves in F1 decided to make an appearance in such a different atmosphere. It's completely understandable, as progressing through the 80s and 90s, all the big names who were leaving the international scene were going to IndyCar or kart, the most well-known of these being Emerson Fittipaldi, who came out of retirement 4 years after his final F1 start to race in the Premier Open Wheel Series in America, winning 2 Indy 500s and a kart championship in the next 12 years. It wouldn't be until 2002 when an ex-Grand Prix driver had a proper crack at NASCAR, with former Footwork Arrows and Minardi man Christian Fittipaldi making his Cup Series debut at the season finale in Phoenix. Before I delve into the first example of a driver making a switch, I need to explain how the racing ladder works in the world of stock cars. Just like Formula 1 has Formula 2 and 3, NASCAR has its own feeder series. Nowadays, the top division is known as the Cup Series, the second tier is known as the Xfinity Series for sponsorship reasons, and the third division is known as the Truck Series. To keep things simple, especially with the ever-changing title sponsors of each division, I'll just call each one by its modern name, regardless of what it was known as at the time. Back to the video, Fittipaldi had made a handful of starts in the second tier of NASCAR throughout 2001 and the early to mid part of the year after in order to pass the time while his kart career stalled, and was signed up by the legendary Petty Enterprises team run by former 7-time champion Richard Petty in their number 44 car for the penultimate race of 2002 at the Phoenix Raceway, but he crashed out with 60 laps to go. The Brazilian managed to qualify for the Daytona 500 in 2003 and finished 35th for Andy Petrie Racing, but rejoined his former employers at Petty to replace an injured John Andretti in the iconic 43, appearing back in the 44 a handful of times too, but his best result in that 16-race stretch was a measly 24th place at Pocono. That put an end to Fittipaldi's short NASCAR career, and it would be a few more years until an ex-F1 talent made his way into the series again. When Juan Pablo Montoya left McLaren in the middle of the 2006 Formula 1 season and announced he was making the direct move to join Chip Ganassi in the top stock car division in the world, it marked the first time that such a move had been made. Montoya did the 06 season finale at Homestead, Miami, along with a handful of second, third, and even fourth tier starts to get him acclimatised to his new environment before his first full-time season. He kicked off his Cup Series career with a decent 19th placed finish in the Daytona 500, then after a few middling results, he got a great run to 5th in Atlanta. In the meantime, he had taken part in the Xfinity race at the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez, the venue for the modern-day Mexican Grand Prix, and he managed to take his first win in any NASCAR series. After a decent top 10 in Texas back in the top category, he hit a barren run of form, but in his first cup race on a road course, aka a track that turns both right and left, at Sonoma, he was victorious after pole sitter Jamie McMurray had to conserve fuel at the end to avoid running out. His first win was still impressive, but aside from a second place run at Indianapolis, the rest of his rookie season wasn't very fruitful at all. Despite a seemingly lackluster 20th in the final standings, Montoya had outperformed his teammates David Stremme and Reed Sorensen, both of which had a year of Cup Series experience over him. 2008 was a winless year for the Colombian, as his Chip Ganassi team fell down the order, while three more ex-Formula One talents made their way into NASCAR for the first time, those being Scott Speed, Jacques Villeneuve and Max Papis, although none were on a full-time basis, competing in a combined 9 events of the 36-race schedule between them. The following year, Villeneuve drove in his home race at the F1 circuit in Montreal in the Xfinity Series, a track that desperately needs to return to NASCAR, and Papis did a part-time schedule in Cup, getting a best result of 8th at Watkins Glen. Scott Speed drove for Red Bull in his first full campaign in 2009, failing to make the top 10 in the point standings through the first 26 races in order to get into the chase for the Cup, which essentially acted like the playoffs you see in other American sports and in European football. I don't want to get too bogged down in how the chase and later the full-on playoffs in stock car racing work, as the more I try to explain it, the more confusing it will be for fans of other motorsports. But in his 2009 form, after the first 2/3 or so of the year, they take the 12 drivers with the most points, reset them all to a number impossible for anyone below to attain, and then the last 10 rounds are a sprint to the finish, as the entire dozen chosen are on a completely level playing field. While Speed achieved 35th in the standings, his teammate Brian Vickers did reach the top 12, but so did Montoya, achieving an impressive 13.8 average finish across the first 26 races of the year. For reference, in NASCAR, an average result of 5 is like a generational championship win akin to a 2022 or 23 Max Verstappen. Getting a median finish of 10 means you were there or thereabouts, and 15th to 20th place on average indicates a fairly consistent midfield contender who might win the odd race or two here and there. Montoya didn't achieve any wins in 2009, but did get 7 top 5s, 6 of which came in an 8-round span towards the end of the year. Surprisingly, his best finishes weren't even on the road courses at Watkins Glen at Sonoma, instead doing extremely well on the short tracks between 0 and 1 mile in length, and the intermediates which are 1 to 2 miles long. Montoya was 8th in the final standings in 2009, while for 2010, he, Speed, Villeneuve and Papis were joined by a former McLaren and Stewart driver, Jan Magnussen, who took part in one race at Sonoma where he was 12th. Papis did the first 23 races, failing to qualify 5 times and getting a best finish of 2 22nd places, while Villeneuve's only Cup appearance came at the Brickyard 400 at Indianapolis. Speed continued to flounder on his way to a 30th place points placing, while Montoya returned to victory lane for the first time in 3 years when he won at the Glen, but still missed out on the chase and was 17th in the final table. Xfinity Series wise, Villeneuve conducted what I'd describe as vehicular terrorism at Road America, Watkins Glen and Montreal on his way to a handful of decent results, while Papis got second at the Canadian race, and new faces Nelson Piquet Jr. and Narain Karthikeyan did a handful of races between them. Montoya fell further down the order in 2011 as the constantly changing car regulations kept going against his driving preferences, while Speed was relegated to a part-time schedule due to his previous lackluster performances in the last few years. Villeneuve continued to use his car as a lethal weapon in the second tier, and Piquet Jr. was joined by former F1 champion Kimi Raikkonen making one-off starts in Xfinity, while the aforementioned Brazilian had done a full-time campaign in trucks with a decent level of success, achieving a 10th place points finish as a rookie, and Papis also did all of the races in the third series, albeit less impressively, in 18th place in the standings. Montoya kicked off his 2012 season by having a mechanical failure right as he passed a jet dryer that was trying to release the moisture from the Daytona International Speedway midway through the race, causing a colossal accident and a fire, and his year wouldn't get much better than that. Villeneuve was doing Villeneuve things on the road courses in Xfinity, as was Piquet Jr. as he was full-time in trucks again, yet won the Road America race in the tier above. Both of Nelsonio's victories in the third series were on ovals, in Michigan and Vegas, on his way to a 7th place, and despite his lack of experience, he was clearly a very versatile driver, only 2 and a bit years removed from his final F1 start as a Renault before he exposed the Crashgate scandal. Montoya achieved 21st place in the 2013 Cup standings, yet again winless, while Speed and Villeneuve did part-time schedules, as did Papis, while Piquet Jr. stepped up to the Xfinity Series and impressively ran to 12th in the championship, despite not getting any wins. The Brazilian scaled down his NASCAR commitments after that season though, thanks to his participation in Formula E and Global Rallycross, which combined with Montoya also reducing down to a part-time schedule, culminated in a reduced impact of XF1 talent in the Premier Division of stock car racing. Aside from Piquet making a one-off appearance at Mid-Ohio in 2016, no former or future Grand Prix driver took part in any of the top 3 series of NASCAR until Villeneuve made a comeback for the 2022 Daytona 500, a full 8 years after his last start, where the Canadian finished 22nd. Then Kimi Räikkönen made his return in the same year at Watkins Glen, making up nearly 20 places and only 25 laps from his lacklustre starting position before being taken out by an accident that wasn't his fault in the bus stop. Also competing in that race, and the previous road course event on the calendar at Indianapolis, was Danny Kvyat, who also appeared in the Xfinity Series at the Charlotte Roval during the year. After Kimi's cameo garnered a decent amount of attention from F1 fans, he, Kvyat, and 2009 F1 champion Jenson Button appeared at the likes of the Circuit of the Americas, the first ever Chicago street race, and the Indy road course, and Jenson was the most successful, taking 18th place at the Texas venue where he'd previously raced on Grand Prix weekends, after which he uttered the radio message that began this video. That was all in 2023, but since then, Kobayashi returned at COTA last year, and Montoya made an appearance at Watkins Glen over a decade after his last start prior to returning. He may have driven around near the back, for the most part, but the fact that as a nearly 50-year-old man, with no experience in the modern next-gen cars, which handle completely differently to what he drove in his heyday, he did an impressive job to not finish last by a long margin. No XF1 drivers have made any plans to race in 2025 to my knowledge, but I'd be surprised if no one made use of NASCAR's new open exemption provisional rule, which essentially says that any quote-unquote world-class driver from another racing series from around the world can turn up to a race with any team and not even have to qualify to be guaranteed a starting spot on the grid. IndyCar legend Helio Castroneves has already used this rule to get himself into the season-opening Daytona 500, and I think this is an obvious play from the governing body to try and fix the issue the series is currently experiencing, in which they don't have the star power they did 10 or 15 years ago. If someone like a Daniel Ricciardo or Max Verstappen joined the grid for one race, even only on a road course, and it was promoted right, I guarantee that the viewing figures would skyrocket. And given that former Aussie Supercars champion Shane Van Gisbergen has comfortably made the switch to America and kicks arse on the tracks that go left and right, I don't think we're a million miles away from top-level F1 drivers like Ricciardo trying to make a name for themselves in NASCAR, purely because it's the second most popular motorsport in the USA behind F1 and has great potential for global expansion, especially with the New Mexico City race that's coming this year. I made this video for 2 reasons. One was to bring both Formula 1 and NASCAR fans to my channel, as they are both motorsports I'm a massive supporter of, and I also wanted to educate snobby Formula 1 ultras who think that their series is the pinnacle of motorsport, when in fact the likes of F1, WEC, NASCAR, IndyCar and Co are all at the top of their respective pyramids. If we take a look at the Grand Prix drivers who've tried racing stock cars, the only guys who had any success were Juan Pablo Montoya, Jacques Villeneuve, and Nelson Piquet Jr. Given that JPM and Jacques were both in IndyCar before F1 and thus would have been more acclimatised to the switch, and in general, both of them were jacks of all trades, who dabbled in many series akin to Fernando Alonso nowadays, the idea of Villeneuve and his Colombian counterpart being competitive isn't that surprising, to be honest. Piquet Jr. was a complete anomaly though, and I think it's a shame he didn't build on his trucks and Xfinity career, because he was mightily fast for a guy who I don't think had driven on ovals before he joined NASCAR. Every other F1 driver who's tried their hands at the series ranged from decent one-offs to mediocre showings over 1 or 2 years, such as Räikkönen, Christian Fittipaldi and Narain Karthikeyan, which proves it's not as easy as the annoying F1 fans who say it is, think it is. If we take a look at the Americans, who started off driving midgets or stock cars like Mario Andretti, Dan Gurney and Mark Donohue, there's actually an argument to be made that those making the transition from NASCAR to F1, rather than the other way around, had far more success. So next time you hear someone say that Kyle Larson is stupid to think that he could beat Max Verstappen on his home turf, on the dirt banks of a Chili Bowl, or on the streets of Chicago, point them in the direction of guys like Jenson Button, an ex-F1 champion who couldn't even qualify in the top 20 in his stock car racing debut on a track he had experience on. When you can't beat Austin Dillon, the NASCAR equivalent of Lance Stroll, except even more of a nepo baby with an even worse reputation somehow, you know that the racing over there has got drivers who are far better than you think they are. This video is hopefully going to release before the first race of the 2025 NASCAR season at Daytona, so I implore you guys to watch it by whatever means necessary. It's on Fox in the USA, and there are many regional broadcasters across the world. There's also illegal streams that make things easier to view, but you didn't hear me say that. I hope this year's opener is a banger, because when it doesn't finish under yellow flags, the average winning margin of the race is 1/10 of a second, so it's either going to be exciting or a wreckfest, which either way is entertaining. Anyways, with that being said, I think that brings today's video to a close. I hope you enjoyed me taking an interesting look into the history of F1 drivers racing in NASCAR, and if you did, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to see more content from me in the future. I hope this made you think deeper about NASCAR and the high level of competition compared to F1, and that it's not just turning left, because even on circuits that the rest of the world is used to, it's the Americans who mostly come out on top in the series. You can also subscribe to my Patreon if you'd like to see exclusive content, get videos a day early, and have an opportunity to converse with me personally for as little as $1 per month. Big shout out to my already existing Patreon subscribers Andy Lamberts, George Stratford and Elizabeth Hearn, and you can also take a look at the DRS Train Podcast, which I host alongside Peter Brook, Nav F1 and Ciaron Smith, where we take deep dives into historical topics and race previews and reviews when the F1 season is on. Furthermore, follow my X/Twitter account where I post boiling hot lava takes on F1, IndyCar and NASCAR, and my Instagram for behind the scenes updates. With my shameless plugging over though, I'm Nedzo, and I'll see you all later. Bye!